Reality is not what you see. Science looks outward. It builds telescopes, particle accelerators, brain scanners, instruments that extend our senses into the very large, the very small, and the very hidden. Buddhism looks inward. For 25 centuries, it has mapped the territory of the mind with a precision that modern psychology is only beginning to approach. Two directions, two traditions, and increasingly, the same discoveries. This is The Meeting Point, a series where neuroscience, physics, and Buddhist teaching find each other. Not because one predicted the other, not because one is right and the other catching up, but because when you climb a mountain from opposite sides, there are places where the paths converge. And the view from those places is extraordinary. Episode 1. Reality is not what you see. Hook. The color red doesn't exist, not as a metaphor, as a finding of physics. Electromagnetic radiation at certain wavelengths bounces off the surface of an apple, enters your eye, and stimulates 3 types of cone cells in your retina. Those cells fire electrical signals down your optic nerve, and somewhere deep inside your visual cortex, your brain does something remarkable. It generates the experience of redness. The vivid, warm, unmistakable quality of red, that subjective sensation you are so certain you see, is created entirely inside your skull. There is no red out there. There are only wavelengths. Your brain interprets them as color. Dr. Rudy Benia, a neuroscientist at Columbia University, puts it plainly, many of us take for granted the colors we see. But those colors do not exist outside of our brains. And here's the thing. This is not a quirk of color vision. This is how all perception works. Your brain is not a passive receiver, a camera pointed at the world. It is a prediction machine, constantly generating a model of what the world probably is, checking that model against incoming sensory data, and updating where necessary. What you experience as the world is not the world. It is the model. In 2017, neuroscientist Anil Seth stood on the TED stage and gave this process a phrase that stopped audiences in their seats: a controlled hallucination. The phrase wasn't originally his. He traces it through other scientists, ultimately back to the 19th century physicist Hermann von Helmholtz and the idea of unconscious inference. But Seth's formulation is vivid. We're all hallucinating all the time. It's just that when we agree about our hallucinations, we call that reality. That observation made international headlines. 2,500 years before Seth's TED Talk, a teacher sitting in a forest in northern India had already traced how the hallucination works, with extraordinary precision, link by link. From the moment light strikes the eye to the moment the mind spins a world around it. And he did something Seth has not. He described what to do about it. Act 1. The Science. How the brain constructs reality. Let's start with science. Because the science is stunning. Imagine being a brain. This is how Seth opens his TED Talk, and it is worth staying with the image. You are locked inside a bony skull. There are no lights inside. There is no sound. You have never directly touched the world. All you receive are streams of electrical impulses, crackling along nerve fibers, that are only indirectly related to whatever is out there. You don't see light. You don't hear the sound. You receive electrical patterns and you have to guess what caused them. Seth's point, perception, figuring out what's there, has to be a process of informed guesswork. The brain combines sensory signals with its prior expectations about the way the world is, and forms its best guess of what caused those signals. This is not Seth's idea alone. It belongs to a framework that has reshaped neuroscience over the past 2 decades. Predictive processing. The theoretical architect is Karl Friston, a physicist and neuroscientist at University College London. Friston proposes that the brain's fundamental drive is to minimize surprise, to keep its internal model so well-tuned that incoming sensory data rarely deviates from what the model expects. When sensory input doesn't match the prediction, a signal fires, a prediction error, and the brain has 2 options. Option 1, update the internal model. That is perception. Option 2, act on the world to change what the senses receive. That is action. Every moment of your waking life is this process, running faster than thought. As Friston told Nautilus magazine, the brain has to sample the world in a way that it knows what's going to happen next. If it didn't, you'd be full of surprises, and you'd die. That sounds abstract. Let me show you what it looks like. There is a famous demonstration called the hollow face illusion, first documented by the psychologist Richard Gregory in 1970. Take a mask, a normal mask of a human face. Now look at it from behind. You are looking at the inside of the mask, the concave, hollow side. The shadows fall the wrong way. The depth cues clearly show a surface curving away from you. And yet, almost everyone sees a normal, protruding face, convex, real, as if someone were looking back at you. Gregory's explanation: the brain's prior expectation, faces are convex, is so powerful that it overrides the actual sensory data arriving at your eyes. You know the mask is hollow. You can watch it rotate and see the illusion break for a fraction of a second, and then snap back. Your brain insists. Faces are convex. End of discussion. Here is where it gets remarkable. Research by Dima, Reuser, and colleagues at University College London found that people with schizophrenia are often not fooled by the hollow face illusion. They see the hollow mask as hollow. They see what is actually there. The finding suggests something profound. What the rest of us call seeing correctly, the convex face, actually requires the brain's top-down prediction to actively suppress the real sensory data. And those whose top-down processing is disrupted trust what is arriving at the senses more than what the model expects. Which raises a question the researchers themselves noted. Which perception is the hallucination? The one that sees what's there, or the one that sees what the brain expects? If the hollow face were the only evidence, you could set it aside as a laboratory curiosity. It is not. In February 2015, a photograph of a dress did something no scientific paper had managed in decades. It made millions of people simultaneously realize that they do not see the same world. The image showed a dress in ambiguous lighting, the same photograph, the same photons entering the same type of human eyes. And yet, roughly 57% of people saw the dress as blue and black. About 30% saw it as white and gold. Not slightly different. Completely different color experiences from identical input. Researcher Pascal Wallisch at New York University investigated. His finding was striking. The split correlated with whether people were typically early risers or late sleepers. His explanation: early risers have stronger prior assumptions about daylight illumination, which is biased toward the blue end of the spectrum. Their brains, accustomed to discounting blue daylight, subtracted the blue from the image and saw white and gold. Late sleepers, more accustomed to artificial warm light, did not make that subtraction and saw blue and black. The external image was fixed. The internal model was different. and the conscious experiences were completely different. Not subtly, fundamentally. Now, it would be easy to take all of this and conclude that perception is simply wrong, that we live in a fog of error, that the brain lies. Seth is precise about what this means and what it does not. He has said, "This hallucination is not a false perception or a perception of something that does not exist. It is a perception modeled by our body and controlled by the brain." And elsewhere, "The control is just as important. Our perceptions are not arbitrary. You do not see random nonsense. You see a very good model, one that has been shaped by hundreds of millions of years of evolution to help you navigate, survive, and reproduce. The model is useful, spectacularly useful. What it is not is transparent. It does not show you the world as it is. It shows you the world as your brain has decided you need to see it. Or as Seth writes in his book, Being You, the controlled hallucination of our perceptual world has been designed by evolution to enhance our survival prospects, not to be a transparent window onto external reality. Andy Clark, the philosopher at the University of Sussex and one of the leading voices on predictive processing, captures the strangeness of this with an analogy. Imagine, he says, a world in which the weather forecast played a role in actually causing the weather. We don't live in that world. But if predictive processing is correct, that is exactly how human experience works. Your predictions don't just anticipate your experience, they partly create it. So here is where science stands, as of this moment. You are not receiving the world, you are constructing it. Every perception is a blend of what arrives at the senses and what the brain expects to find. The model is good enough to keep you alive, to navigate traffic, to recognize a friend's face across a crowded room. But it is a model, built from priors, updated by prediction errors, controlled, useful, and, in Seth's precise sense, a hallucination. Science describes the machinery. It maps the mechanism with extraordinary sophistication, and then it stops. Because there is a question the neuroscience does not ask. What do you do with this knowledge? If you now know that your experience of the world is a construction, a set of labels and predictions layered over raw sensory data, does that change anything? Can you learn to see the construction as it happens? Can you interrupt the automatic loop? 2,500 years ago, someone asked exactly those questions and built a practice around the answers. Act 2. The Buddha, How Saññā Constructs the World. This is the pattern of the meeting point. Science describes the mechanism. The Buddha goes further, and further means from description to practice, from third-person observation to first-person investigation, from knowing that perception is constructed to being able to watch the construction happen in real time, in your own mind. There is a discourse in the Pali Canon called the Madhupindika Sutta, the Honeyball Discourse, MN 18. It is one of the most important teachings the Buddha ever gave on perception. And it reads, today, like a neuroscience paper, written in the language of contemplative experience. The teaching was elaborated by one of the Buddha's senior students, Venerable Maha Kaccana. And what he laid out is a chain, a sequence of events that happens every time you perceive anything at all. It begins simply. Dependent on the eye and forms, there is contact. The sense organ meets the sense object. Light strikes the retina. From contact, feeling arises, not emotion, something more basic. A raw hedonic tone, pleasant, unpleasant, or neither. Before you know what you are looking at, you already feel something about it. a flicker of attraction, a subtle pull of aversion, or nothing at all. This is Vedana, and it happens before thought. And then, the hinge. The moment everything changes. What one feels, one perceives. What one perceives, one thinks about. What one thinks about, one proliferates. Listen to that sequence again. What you feel, you label. What you label, you think about. What you think about, you proliferate. You spin stories. You build narratives. You confirm expectations. You construct a world. By the time you are conscious of something, by the time you say to yourself, "I see a red apple," it has already passed through layers of construction, contact, feeling, labeling, thinking, proliferation. The world you experience is not the world as it is. It is the world as your mind has built it. The Pali word for that labeling step is Saññā, and the translation Thanissaro Bhikkhu uses is precise. Labels in the mind, not passive reception, active categorization. The mind does not receive a world, it identifies one. Stay with this for a moment, because the parallel with predictive processing is not a loose analogy. It is structurally exact. What arrives at your eye right now is electromagnetic radiation of various wavelengths, reflected at particular intensities from the surfaces around you, stimulating 3 types of cone cells in patterns that travel along your optic nerve to your visual cortex. That is what arrives, what your mind adds: room, screen, light, familiar, mine, safe. The label comes after, but it feels like it was always there. It feels like you opened your eyes and saw a room. You did not. You opened your eyes and your mind built a room, faster than you could notice the building. Thanissaro puts it this way: no matter how hard you try to pin down an unfiltered experience of breathing, you still find it shaped by your idea of what breathing actually is. Even breath, the most basic object of meditation, arrives pre-labeled. You cannot find the raw data underneath. Not because it isn't there, but because Saññā is that fast, that seamless, that invisible. And there is a further step in the chain from the Madhupindika Sutta that makes the construction even more total. After labeling comes papanka, proliferation, objectification. Thanissaro translates it as the perceptions and categories of objectification assailing the mind. What we proliferate, he notes, is not the events themselves. It is our idea of what is happening. And the root of that proliferation is a single perception: I am the thinker. From that one self-reflexive label, the entire architecture of me and not me, mine and not mine, being and not being unfolds. The chain in the Madhupindika Sutta is not a theory about perception. It is a description of what is happening right now. Every moment you are conscious. Contact, feeling, labeling, thinking, proliferation, world. Karl Friston would call it sensory input to prediction, error, to model, update, to experience. The Buddha called it phassa to Vedana, to Saññā, to Vitakka, to papanka. Different language, same architecture, mapped from opposite directions. Now, the Buddha did not stop at describing the chain. He also described what perception is. In the Phenapindupama Sutta, SN 2295, the Buddha compared each of the 5 aggregates, the 5 components of experience, to something in the natural world. Form is like a glob of foam. Feeling is like a water bubble. Consciousness is like a magic trick. And perception, Saññā, is like a mirage. Not a hallucination, not an error. A mirage. The distinction matters. A mirage is not nothing. When you drive down a long road on a hot day and see water shimmering on the asphalt ahead, something is happening. Light is refracting through layers of heated air. There is a real optical event. But what the event presents, water on the road, is not there. The Buddha said, examine any perception, past, future, or present, and it appears empty, void, without substance. For what substance would there be in a mirage? The experience of perception occurs. What it presents as solid reality is not solid. Seth would say, perception is a controlled hallucination, useful, not arbitrary, but not transparent. The Buddha would say, perception is a mirage, shimmering, vivid, but upon examination, without the substance it appears to have. Two metaphors, 25 centuries apart, pointing at the same thing. And then the Buddha made a claim more radical than anything in modern neuroscience. In the Sabha Sutta, SN 3523, a monk asks the Buddha to explain the all, everything that exists. The Buddha's answer is striking in its completeness and its boundary. What is the all? Simply the eye and forms, ear and sounds, nose and aromas, tongue and flavors, body and tactile sensations, intellect and ideas. This is called the all. That is the entire experienceable world, 6 sense bases and their objects, nothing more. This is not the claim that the world does not exist. It is something more precise. The world as you experience it is constituted entirely by the meeting of your senses and what they encounter. There is no experience of a world apart from that meeting. You cannot step outside the contact between perceiver and perceived to see what is really there, because the stepping outside would itself be another act of perception, another meeting of sense and object, another construction. Friston's framework says, the brain is a model of its world. The Buddha says, what you call the world is the model, not as a theoretical proposition, as something you can verify in your own experience right now if you pay close enough attention. This is where the Buddha's teaching becomes something science has not yet become, a set of instructions. Thanissaro writes, we use our memories from the past to cover up the present, to shape our experience of the present. And you'll see that the actual physical experience of the body is going to change because of the mental label. Predictive processing says priors shape perception. The Buddha says your labels shape your world. Both are describing the same phenomenon. But the Buddha adds a question that changes everything. Can you learn to watch the labeling as it happens? Not suppress it, not stop it, see it. Because if Saññā is an act, if labeling is something the mind does, not something that simply occurs, then it can be observed. An observation, the Buddha taught, is where freedom begins. Not freedom from perception. Freedom from being controlled by perception without knowing it. Act 3, the convergence, same mountain. Two traditions, two methods, two vocabularies built in completely different centuries, on different continents for different purposes. And yet, when you place them side by side, the overlap is not vague, it is structural. Predictive processing says, perception is not reception, it is construction. The brain generates a model based on prior expectations and checks it against sensory input. What you experience is the model. The Madhupindika Sutta says, what one feels, one perceives. What one perceives, one thinks about. What one thinks about, one proliferates. What you experience is the proliferation. Both say, you are not receiving the world, you are building it. Both say, the building is shaped by what came before. by prior experience, prior expectation, prior labels. Both say, the construction is so fast, so seamless, that it feels like direct contact with reality. It is not. And both say, knowing this matters. Anil Seth knows this overlap exists. He has said so, carefully, in his own words. At the Mind and Life Institute, the organization founded specifically to bring Buddhist contemplatives and Western scientists into sustained dialogue, Seth acknowledged what he sees. I do see this close alignment between the insights we're getting from cognitive neuroscience and Buddhism, to the extent that things are not necessarily the way they seem. Things can change. There's an impermanence to the self. And then, with characteristic intellectual honesty, he added, not exactly the same place. I would never claim that. That tempering is important. Seth is a scientist. He is not making a spiritual claim. He is noting a convergence and being honest about where the convergence has limits. The methods are different. The goals are different. The frameworks operate at different levels of description. But the convergence he acknowledges is real, and it goes deeper than even Seth has explored in public. Because here is where the two maps become remarkably precise in their overlap. In predictive processing, your experience of the world is shaped by priors, the brain's prior expectations, built from a lifetime of past experience that determine what the model predicts before any sensory data arrives. Priors are why you see a convex face when the mask is hollow. Priors are why early risers see a white dress when late sleepers see blue. Priors are the invisible architecture of your constructed world. In Buddhism, your experience of the world is shaped by saṅkhāras, fabrications, volitional formations, the accumulated patterns of past action and reaction that condition how the mind responds to every new moment of contact. Saṅkhāras are why the same sunset produces peace in one mind and grief in another. They are the invisible architecture of your constructed world. Different words, same function. Prior expectations that shape perception before perception even begins. The Mind and Life Institute has published this parallel explicitly. Pagnoni and Hasenkamp wrote, "The notion of karma, past behavior that biases the trajectory of our current perceptions and actions, aligns quite naturally with the role of prior knowledge in predictive coding. This is not a stretch. This is not a poetic analogy for a popular audience. This is researchers in both traditions looking at the same structural feature and recognizing it. And here is where the convergence reaches its most remarkable point. The point that changes how you understand both traditions. If perception is shaped by priors, can the priors be changed? Neuroscience says, yes, that is what learning is. Every prediction error that updates the model is a small change in priors. But the Buddha asked a more radical question. Can you change the priors deliberately? Can you systematically loosen the grip of prior expectation on present experience, not by accident, not by random learning, but by sustained, disciplined practice? The answer, according to published neuroscience, is yes, and the practice is meditation. In 2021, researchers Ruben Laukkanen and Helene Slagter published a paper in Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews that argued this explicitly. Their conclusion: practicing meditation gradually reduces predictive processing, in particular counterfactual cognition, the tendency to construct abstract and temporally deep representations. In plain language, meditation loosens the model's confidence. It reduces the brain's tendency to automatically impose its expectations on incoming experience. It keeps the system checking, rather than just confirming. The same paper made a connection that would have startled the Buddha's contemporaries if they could have read it. Laukkonen and Slagter noted that if arising predictions are not under conscious control, if they arise automatically, shaped by past conditioning, then they have no consistent, unchanging, self-like character. The Pali word for this, the authors noted, is anatta, not self. Predictive processing, the paper argues, does not just parallel Buddhist teaching on perception. It provides a mechanistic account of why the teaching on not self makes sense. If you are a bundle of prior predictions that shift and update moment to moment, where exactly is the fixed self? A separate line of research reaches the same conclusion from a different angle. Lutz, Matute, and Pagnoni, writing in Current Opinion in Psychology in 2019, argued that the free energy principle, Friston's framework, is optimally suited for the scientific investigation of contemplative practices. Their reasoning: the framework ties together the core meditative notions of attention, which in predictive processing terms is the deployment of precision weighting, the conditioning power of habitual patterns of thought, which are priors, and the embodied nature of cognition, which is interoceptive inference. Meditation in this framework is not relaxation. It is not clearing your mind. It is a systematic practice of changing the precision weights the brain assigns to its own predictions versus incoming sensory data. When you sit and attend to the breath, just what arrives, you are, in Friston's language, turning up the gain on sensory precision and turning down the gain on prior expectation. You are training the brain to trust what arrives more and predict less. And at McGill University, a study funded by the Mind and Life Institute is investigating this directly. Researcher Jonas Mago is using EEG to study what happens during jhana, deep meditative absorption. The study's central hypothesis, stated in the grant itself, focused attention meditation can precisely modulate the expectations that are used to interpret sensory data. The science is not speculating about whether meditation changes priors, it is measuring it. So let us be precise about what the convergence is and what it is not. It is not that the Buddha predicted neuroscience. He did not know about neurons, prediction errors, or free energy. He was not doing science. It is not that neuroscience confirms Buddhism. Science operates by third-person measurement. The Buddha's teaching operates by first-person investigation. They are different methods with different standards of evidence. What the convergence is: two completely independent traditions, one investigating from the outside using instruments, one investigating from the inside using disciplined attention, arriving at the same structural discovery. Perception is construction. The construction is shaped by prior conditioning, and the construction can be changed. They agree on the map. They drew it from opposite sides of the mountain. Where they diverge is what comes next. Act 4. Buddha goes further, from description to practice. Seth's observation that perception is a controlled hallucination is brilliant. It is important. It has changed how an entire generation of neuroscientists thinks about consciousness, and it ends there. The neuroscience says, you construct reality. Your brain generates a model shaped by prior expectations, and what you experience is that model, not the world itself. Fascinating. Perhaps be more humble about your certainties. Perhaps hold your convictions a little more lightly. And then, what's for lunch? This is not a criticism of Seth, or of Friston, or of anyone working in predictive processing. Science describes. That is what science does. It maps the mechanism with extraordinary precision. and the mapping alone is a gift. But the Buddha looked at the same discovery and asked a different question. Not, how does perception construct reality? But, what do you do with this knowledge? If Saññā is a label, can you watch it label? If the chain runs from contact to feeling, to perception to proliferation, can you interrupt the chain? Not suppress it, not fight it, not pretend it isn't there. See it, while it is happening, in real time, in your own mind. And the Buddha's answer, tested across 25 centuries of practice, is yes. There is a discourse in the Samyutta Nikaya known as the Malunkyaputta Sutta, SN 3595, in which the Buddha gives what may be the most precise instruction on perception ever recorded. He says, in reference to the seen, there will be only the seen. In reference to the heard, only the heard. In reference to the sensed, only the sensed. In reference to the cognized, only the cognized. In the seen, just the seen. Not the seen plus your label. Not the seen plus your emotional reaction. Not the seen plus the story you immediately begin telling yourself about what you saw. Not the seen plus the expectation that was already in place before the seeing began. Just the seen. This is not an instruction to become robotic. It is not a call to strip experience of its richness, to walk through the world as a cold, detached observer. It is something far more radical than that. It is an instruction to stop adding the second layer, the automatic interpretation, the immediate categorization, the expectation-driven enhancement, before you have even registered what actually arrived. The discourse continues, and what follows is among the most remarkable passages in the entire Pali Canon. When for you there will be only the seen in reference to the seen, there is no you in connection with that. When there is no you in connection with that, there is no you there. When there is no you there, you are neither here nor yonder, nor between the two. This, just this, is the end of stress. Read that again, slowly. When you stop adding the label, when there is just the seen, without the automatic construction of a you who is doing the seeing, something extraordinary happens. The chain described in the Madhupindika Sutta, MN 18, stops. Contact occurs, feeling arises, but Saññā, the labeling, the identifying, the constructing, does not automatically proliferate into a world of me and mine, here and there, self and other. The construction pauses, and in that pause, the Buddha says, is the end of suffering, not the end of perception, the end of being controlled by perception without knowing it. The same discourse describes what normally happens, what happens when practice is absent. Seeing a form, mindfulness lapsed, attending to the theme of endearing, impassioned in mind, one feels and remains fastened on it. This is the default mode. You see something. Mindfulness lapses, which means you do not notice the construction happening. The mind attends to whether the thing is endearing or threatening, desirable or repulsive. Passion or aversion arises, and you remain fastened, stuck to the perception, identified with the reaction, swept into proliferation before you knew it began. And what happens with practice? Not impassioned with forms, seeing a form with mindfulness firm, dispassioned in mind, one knows and doesn't remain fastened on it. The seeing still happens, the form is still there, but mindfulness is present, which means you are watching the construction as it constructs. And because you see the label being applied, you are not swept away by it, and you do not remain fastened. This is not theory, it is instruction, as practical and specific as a recipe. And the practice goes even deeper. In the Satipatthana framework, the Buddha's most detailed instructions on meditation, there is a definition of sampajañña, often translated as alertness or clear comprehension, SN 4735. Perceptions are known to him as they arise, known as they become established, known as they subside. This is metacognitive awareness of perception itself, not perceiving. Watching perceiving happen, knowing that a label is arising, knowing that it is persisting, knowing that it is passing away, not identified with the label, not fighting it, not clinging to it, simply knowing. In the language of predictive processing, this is watching the prior being deployed, seeing the model generate its prediction, noticing the prediction error, or noticing its absence. Not from the outside with an fMRI scanner, from the inside with sustained, disciplined attention. Thanissaro Bhikkhu captures what this practice reveals. Meditation teaches you the power of your perceptions. You come to see how the labels you apply to things, the images with which you visualize things, have a huge influence over what you see. Not as a concept you agree with, as something you watch happening, and in the watching, something shifts. The grip loosens. The automation slows. The chain from contact to proliferation, which normally runs in milliseconds without your knowledge, begins to become visible. And this is where the two traditions finally diverge, not in what they see, but in what they do with what they see. Science describes the machinery. It maps the prediction, the prior, the error signal, the model update. It tells you with great precision that you are constructing reality. And that knowledge is valuable, genuinely valuable. The Buddha teaches you to watch the machinery run, not as a detached observer cataloging mechanisms for a journal article, as someone who wants to be free, free of being driven by constructions you never chose, shaped by priors you never examined, swept into proliferations you never noticed beginning. In the scene, just the scene. Not a philosophy, a practice. One you can begin with the next thing you see. Landing. Two traditions, same discovery. The brain constructs reality. Saññā builds the world. Neuroscience arrived at this through decades of brain scanning, mathematical modeling, and carefully designed experiments with hollow masks and ambiguous dresses. The Buddha arrived at it through sustained first-person investigation, watching, with extraordinary patience and precision, how the mind constructs experience moment by moment. They agree, you are not seeing the world as it is. You are seeing a model shaped by everything that came before this moment. And once you know that, once you can actually see the construction happening, in real time, in your own experience, the world does not disappear. It does not become less vivid or less real. It becomes, perhaps for the first time, genuinely visible. Not the model pretending to be reality. The model, seen clearly as a model. The teaching is not that reality is an illusion. It is that your experience of reality is far more constructed than it feels. And that seeing the construction, clearly, patiently, without flinching, is the beginning of something the neuroscience has not yet mapped. Next, Episode 2. We have seen how the brain constructs reality, how Saññā labels experience before you know it has labeled, how the model your mind builds feels so seamless, so immediate, that it passes for the world itself. But what happens to that construction when nothing lasts? not just the perceptions. The things the perceptions are about, not just the labels in the mind, the objects they are labeling. Your body, your relationships, the ground beneath your feet. In 7 to 10 years, almost none of the atoms in your body right now will still be there. They will have been replaced, molecule by molecule, cell by cell, by entirely different matter. And yet you feel continuous. You feel like the same person who started watching this video, the same person who woke up this morning, the same person who existed 10 years ago. How? The second law of thermodynamics says, everything tends toward disorder. Every structure breaks down. Every pattern dissolves. The universe moves inexorably toward entropy. 2,500 years ago, the Buddha called this anicca, impermanence. And he said something the physicists have not, that your suffering is not caused by impermanence itself. It is caused by your relationship to impermanence. Next time, The Meeting Point, Episode 2. Nothing lasts, not even atoms.